Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I've got a really great show planned for you today. Now, as some of you know, yesterday I spent a couple hours with a New York Times reporter, and it was so, what I expected, and, they were looking for these sound bites and trying to make me repent for the sins of my past and, apologize for things like loose change, etc., etc. I don't have a lot of hopes that this is going to be anything more than a hit piece. However, he abided by my rules. We taped the whole thing. He says he's going to come on the show after the fact. But I don't have a lot of hope for Kevin Roose repenting for his mainstream sins. That being said, we actually have someone who has done more than just repent for those sins, but join the realm of alternative media and start asking questions that she just wasn't allowed to working for network news. So those not familiar with Alison Morrow, she's over on Rockfin among many other platforms. I would encourage you to go to Rockfin. As you know, the conversation might get spicy, guys, and we might have to take it all the way over to Rockfin because there's so much you can't say on YouTube. So we're not only happy to have her, but for my audience who's not aware of you, Alison, tell us how you got started in journalism. What sparked that even before you got into it? Was this like a lifelong thing, or did you kind of fall into it, etc.?
I think maybe my journey towards being in the indie rogue world that I'm in now started when I was shooting a series at the barn where I boarded my horse called Psycho Girl. I used to have a little camera when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I would do all kinds of pranks with my friends' horses when they would go on vacation, and I'd shoot videos of it and put them together. And I didn't know how to edit, obviously, at 7, so I had to like shoot everything as if I was editing my little movie. I've always really loved photography, and I also was a punk, like kind of a punk growing up. And so I don't know if the two of those together, just at some point I was like, I got a little more serious, so that enjoyable like jumping up behind somebody with a camera kind of thing turned into investigative journalism, it's somewhere around the road. But I always loved shooting video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is something that kind of led me down this path. I didn't think I was going to be involved in news either. I thought I would be like in special effects or editing. But I do specifically remember at my college, Spike Lee came there and spoke. And basically his message at the time, and this is the late 90s, this is pre 9/11, was that the technology was so cheap now that anybody was going to be able to get involved in this filmmaking. And that he had basically not only gone to film school, but maxed out credit cards, put himself into so much debt just to make She's Gotta Have It. And luckily that worked for him, but it doesn't work for so many other people. Whereas, right now, for instance, I'm in a, bedroom in my house I don't use. I've got 4 monitors that probably retail for around, I don't know, I probably get them in a salvo shop for under $300. A tower, some other stuff. Everything's about $2,500. I'm now streaming across the world in 1080p to 3 separate platforms. I could throw another one on there. It shows you how quick technology moves and how you have to use it to be empowered, right? So that first video camera, I totally get it. And so what, you just seek that out afterwards? You went to school for journalism, or?
No, I didn't go to school for journalism. I've never really been a groupie, and getting into college, I didn't even know the difference between communication and journalism, so I thought they were the same thing. So I chose a university based on the communication school, but then I started communication classes, and second or third one, I'm like, I think I'm getting dumber, honestly. So
I took mass comm too, just as base, and I'm like, what is this? It's basically, they were like, if you had at least in the 90s when I went, it was like, if you have no social skills in the real world, or a work ethic, or how to sit down for a resume, they were like these base classes that were like dumber than a driver's ed course.
Yeah, there were a lot of football players in my communication classes because they were just trying to choose a major that they could handle while basically their real job was playing football.
Mhm.
And they just didn't have time. So it's not to say they were dumb. It's just they didn't have time to do a ton of schoolwork.
Mhm.
And so the coaches would be like, just be a communication major, because then you could just basically do nothing and you'll succeed. And then you can spend all your time playing football. So I ended up becoming a history and French double major. And I loved history. And I honestly think that also really primed me for where I am now, because history doesn't necessarily, it's not like a critical thinking class in the sense that you're not studying critical thinking, but if you're paying attention, hopefully what you're learning is that there are reasons the things are the way they are. And if you can just know that basic fact that it's not just like we just got here by chance, that there are people and influences that create the system that you live in, then you're ready to go for whatever era you get dropped in. And I think you're better set to be a journalist. I don't know what they study in journalism school, because again, like I said, I didn't even go. I went to communication for like 3 classes and then I quit. I will say one thing I learned being a communication major is that I'm terrible with deadlines. I had one professor that I will say, she was really adamant that you learn that if you don't get your story in by noon, then it's not on the newscast, which is true. I missed many a deadline in my younger career as a TV news journalist, but she locked me out of my final exam. She literally locked the door because I was a minute late. And so I got a 0 on my final exam and a C for the class. And I'm like, you know what? I'm too smart to get a C in communication. And that was the final nail in the coffin. I was done after that.
That's hilarious. And just kind of going back to history, I do believe that those that do not understand history are doomed to repeat it. And we're kind of seeing that more and more today. This idea that there could never be anything nefarious going on behind the scenes, and that these people don't really have any real power, and that they can be held accountable when everything screams otherwise in our face right now. I mean, how many of these authoritarian figures in government and business, right, all across the board, and military, in politics, have been held accountable for anything over the past couple years, Alison? And I'm hoping that's waking more and more people up, and obviously bringing people into your audience. So let's get to when you're actually at the news organization. How do you get started? What's that career like? Did you like it? I mean, I know it's very deadline tough. I had a guy who he ended up having to learn more software because he was on the hardware editing, where you're actually putting tapes in and decks and all those other things.
Right.
And he ended up
decks. This must have been what, like 20 years ago?
So no, actually, so he had worked in the business. Yes, he started about 20 years ago. And basically I was running the Cooperstown Dreams Park video department, and I had just kind of modernized that as well. I was like, guys, you guys got HDV tapes. I mean, let's get a couple handy cams. We'll get some kids out there. Final Cut Pro, let's do this. So basically, he came in not because he needed the job, but because he wanted to work for news and didn't know Final Cut and didn't know Premiere or After Effects or anything, and all this digital technology, which they were now using. So he came in and he was talking about the deadlines and going on trucks and shooting, with the big camera on his shoulder and all this stuff. And I have him with little bullet cams. And teach them this. So, my deadlines, I mean, they were there, obviously, but the technology moved so quick, and it wasn't like 12 noon from a story that we shot at 8 in the morning, and I know that's much more your style. Talk about that.
Well, so it's just funny to what you were talking about. Markets are different depending on where you work. Seattle, because unions are still a reality in Seattle, whereas they just aren't in a lot of other markets. When I got there 7 or 8 years ago, they had just started to let reporters edit their own stuff. And I had been doing that for years, because in 2008, one of the biggest changes in modern day journalism was the recession, when TV stations decided they were going to double or triple the amount of live programming that they had, but they didn't want to hire any more people. So the only way they were going to fill all those newscasts was they were going to teach reporters to shoot and edit, and photographers were going to become basically on-camera personalities, or at least they were going to put stories together on their own. Even if maybe they would voice them, maybe they wouldn't. They would just be what we call a nat package, where it's just, sound bites put together. But we were all going to start doing everybody else's jobs. in Seattle, they still had union control at the time. I was the first one for my TV station in Seattle to be what's called a multimedia journalist. You know, you shoot, you write, you edit, you drive the car, you do it all. You're a photographer, reporter, engineer, all the things in one. And I was the second in the entire market. And so, you know, there were a lot of photographers that had just come from tape to tape editing. You know, where you're putting the one tape in, you're going, you know, and you want it to come out the other side on another tape. And you know, if you screw something up, you got to go back and redo the whole thing. It's not nonlinear editing where you can just go take apart. So imagine, you know, for people who want to understand some of the problems systemically with the news business, it's not all just the ideological corruption, which is definitely a reality, but like think about, you know, when you go from like the amount of time intensity, right, that it takes to do that tape to tape stuff, right? So that's why we only had one newscast or two newscasts a day, because you literally could not pump out material when you're editing in that format with, you know, like Stone Age devices. Now, when you have all of a sudden computers, you have Adobe Premiere, you have all these things. Now it's like, okay, now I can work faster. I make a mistake, I don't have to redo the entire thing. I can go back and just take that part out, add something else in. All right, well, let's add a 4 o'clock newscast. Let's add a 5 o'clock newscast. Hey, actually, why don't we let Alison shoot her own video too? And she can edit, because now she can do all these things. And now she's got to. So even if you're a well-meaning journalist and you're doing the best you can when it comes to thinking critically about the topics you're covering, you have all this other stuff that's now popped out of nowhere. When we were 10, 15 years ago, like in Seattle, when I got there, like I said, still kind of in the Stone Age back then, you know, they're still doing that. They still only had a few newscasts too. I had come from a place that was just wall to wall, but eventually it took over there. And that was part of the reason why I decided to leave, because I just felt like I was covering complex topics. I just didn't have the time to do it. And I was doing a million different jobs. But funny story, when I first got there, and, you know, they'd never really at my station seen somebody like me, who was doing all this stuff on her own. I'm working with this really nice photographer. He's 65 years old. We're really crunching on deadline. He had just learned how to edit on a computer. Okay. I mean, this is in 2014, I want to say. And, you know, I had been doing it for 6 or 7 years at this point. And so I'm like, Brad, you know, are we going to make slot? And he's just like, oh, you know, and you see the sweat pouring, and I'm like, just move it. And I just push him out of the chair. Like, because it was technically like illegal at the time for me to take his job. That would be like me taking his job,
Sure.
right? And we could get in a lot of trouble. But I was like, won't tell anyone. You don't tell anyone. Just go set up a fucking live shot, and I will get the package done. And so, you know, it's just like that you just become so you know, I felt terrible because I'm like, I love you, but I don't want to miss a lot, and just go set up the live shot. I'll take care of this. But more and more, you know, they're like, oh, she can do that. You know, they can do that. And so then you start doing more and more. So you lose the amount of time that you have to think, which is supposed to be a really big part of what a journalist is, right? But you don't have time to think. And honestly, when it comes down to like booking an interview, if you've got 3 hours to get your story done and Jason calls me back, but Joe Bob doesn't, well, you're the one that gets on TV, right? Because you called me back in 30 minutes and you could drop everything in your schedule. It has nothing to do with, I think you're the better qualified person to talk about it. You have the better points to make or anything. It's just that you filled my time, right? And so I'm like, great, Jason's fine. He works for today. There's just a lot of that kind of stuff happening right now.
All right. So then what did you cover? And kind of take us a little bit through your career, but then what were some of the red flags that started coming up? Because I know that you talked about them in our last discussion, but then you kind of reflected after the fact that there were certain things that kind of did seem taboo, even in your, you know, you were mainstream, but you were localized. You weren't national news. But even there, you kind of you felt pressure. There were certain stories that had slants or you couldn't cover a certain way.
Right. Okay. So I worked for my last job was working for the NBC affiliate in Seattle. So it was a local news station, but I was one of the only environmental reporters that did it full-time environmental coverage for, you know, a TV station in the entire country. So a lot of my stuff did go to the network. And that's another thing people should understand. You know, the networks are taking local news pieces all the time. The local news are taking their affiliates all the time. Is, you know, one reporter could be sharing the news for the entire country. So if that one reporter gets something wrong, sorry, you know, you're watching it. Well, the same thing goes for like AP and Reuters, the wires. You have one reporter and then every station or newspaper is going to repeat what they're saying. If they get it wrong, oh well, you know, that it's all on that person. Towards the end, I think it probably wasn't so much that things had drastically changed, but I was starting to drastically change. I think my awareness, because I started getting, honestly, I was watching YouTube videos, and I was seeing how other voices that were critical of mainstream news were covering the same topics, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're making a really good point, and we're getting a lot of this stuff really wrong, and stuff that was, some of it, maybe didn't have huge consequences, but others of it was really bad. And then of course the Trump presidency comes along, and I just saw like this level of what I call journalism by moral dissociation become more and more common, meaning I'm morally I am morally restricted as a journalist from showing that side. I morally cannot allow you, the viewer, to hear what that person is saying because the stakes are just so high. And it went from journalist being someone who seeks the most dangerous, contrarian, weird person. That was the person that we were excited to land back in the day. Like, that was the person you wanted to hear from because you were just curious, like, how does a person think that thing? You wouldn't want to just put somebody on the news that thinks what everybody else thinks, because it's not news. But the guy that thinks the weird stuff, that was the person that I always wanted to hear from. That's what I thought we were there to do. But towards the end of my career, it was very obvious, especially mid-Trump administration, that now what we did was go away from those people. Those people were dangerous. They could, they were disinformation and spreaders, and we were the disinformation warriors. We were there to make sure that people were not able to spread bad ideas, dangerous ideas. So it was just a very odd place to be going from someone who was looking to understand ideas that were challenging mainstream narratives to somebody who was trying to block those ideas, and that those same things those different things are both called journalism. It's just a very odd thing. So, like, final story, that one of the last things that kind of made me crack on it all was our state was debating vaccine mandates for children in school, and we were covering it and going to protests a lot. Like, this is typically how we would do it. And then we would have like a mom on TV that would be screaming about, my child shouldn't have to be forced into a certain medical decision, but then you would put her up against like the Department of Health. And we never had like doctors actually, or scientists, debating whether vaccine mandates were a good or a bad thing. And I didn't know anything really about the topic at all at the time. But I happened to hear that there was a conference coming, there were a bunch of doctors coming to town for Informed Choice Washington. I'd never heard of Informed Choice Washington. I didn't even know what Informed Choice was. But I heard that, that these doctors were concerned about the mandates. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that would be an interesting perspective, since we never hear from scientists and doctors. We do this thing where it's like mom versus Department of Health, and it doesn't seem like a fair fight. I wanted to understand why there were doctors out there, genuinely wanted to understand, Jason, because I literally just gotten 2 vaccines to go to Africa. I was not sitting there somebody who knew a lot, hey, let's go talk to those crazy informed choice conspiracy theorists, or whatever. Like, I didn't know what I was stepping into. I just thought, hey, if there are doctors that are concerned, we should talk to the doctors and have them debate the other doctors that we're bringing on the channel. We're already covering it. Let's do it that way. And I was told that I was never allowed to pitch a story again about vaccines, not even cover it. Because remember, I was an environmental reporter. I wouldn't have covered it anyway, but I wasn't even allowed to pitch stories about vaccines because I was untrustworthy. I was told that my boss trusted me on everything else, but not vaccines. And then I was also told that they would never let somebody on our air that questioned vaccines, in the same way they would never let anyone question climate change, that those people were psychopaths, basically, that should not be listened to. So that was when I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. I remember it was a joke. We had this like Stand for Truth campaign happening at the time. And I'm like telling my parents, yeah, I just got this shirt that says Truth Seeker on it. And I want to add on the back, like, except for, and then like put the topics that, we're not allowed to seek truth about. So yeah. And, hey, listen, is that something that I experienced at every news operation? No. But do I feel like that became more common? That idea that, no, we don't let it. Yeah, it definitely became more common into the later part of my career.
And I think we're seeing more and more of that. I don't think it's anything brand new. obviously. I mean, just for you to ask that question in an honest manner and then all of a sudden get pushback that you weren't ready for. And again, it wasn't like you were coming off the wall. You're like, it would make sense that these medical professionals who are questioning it should go against the medical professionals that are promoting it instead of having this stacked deck argument. Again,
Right.
common sense. Common sense is kind of gone by the wayside these days. And now
Yeah.
you do basically independent journalism. I know that you've struggled a little bit on YouTube. You've come over to Rockfin.
Struggle.
Well, I mean, struggled in the sense that you've gotten some
No,
strikes.
it's a nice way of saying, censored.
Well, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm riding 2 strikes dirty right now. I got 7 days till they take one of them down. But there are just some things that obviously I felt like I can't talk about. I've kind of limited myself on this platform.
Right.
And I know that you've done the same thing where, you might have a conversation with somebody and then take them over. That alone is frustrating. It's frustrating that the economics aren't there on YouTube, the largest platform in the world, supposedly a private business. There's a lot of other problems. But somehow you found a way to leave mainstream news and kind of plant yourself in this very open environment, kind of new environment. And amidst what seems like, a marriage and a new child and all these things, how did you feel about jumping the ship? Because I know that there's a lot of financial incentive. This is probably your pension or your 401k, your insurance, et cetera. How did that work?
Well, I do other work financially to make things go. I'm not full time on, the independent stuff, though I hope that someday in the near future I will be able to do that. My husband travels a lot for work. He's a contractor, has his own business, but he's a self-employed person who has to travel, and doesn't have healthcare. So all those things are questions that people that go into this world have to think about. And I think it does become a barrier, though. I will say the nice thing seeing like a Rockfin develop is that it makes it the process is way faster getting to a place where you can be full-time, because like you were saying, YouTube, the size of the audience that you have to have and the amount of ads that they have to put on your channel, and then of course like the censorship and the self-censorship that you deal with in order to figure out how to get those views and all that. It's not a place where like you're gonna, at least not anymore, maybe 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, but not now. It's not a place where you're gonna, in 1 year, in my opinion, if you're talking about the stuff we're talking about, you're not gonna be, maybe not even in a year, maybe never, you're never gonna be full-time on YouTube, because you don't even know when you show up to your office tomorrow if it's going to be open or your landlord's going to have locked you out. You know what I mean? So it's just not a viable option anymore. And I think when I first got into it, I didn't know what I didn't know, kind of the same way as journalism. So I just, I think if I had known all of this stuff at the beginning, maybe I would have been a little too nervous to get into it, but I didn't. So, I think, when I first got into it, I was doing like Airstream renovation stuff because my husband and I are renovating an Airstream we want to live in, and, buy a lot of property and live out in the middle of nowhere, and then hopefully someday build a house, or maybe just have them ship in like a log cabin, because clearly it's taken us 3 years to work on the Airstream and we're still not anywhere near finished. So we have problems with schedules. But that said, I was just doing very simple stuff, and then it was just by virtue of the Airstream renovation hitting a winter gridlock, we weren't able to work on it, and COVID was taking hold, and so it was like COVID plus Trump, and watching my industry really do some very damaging reporting, and I just finally decided, listen, at the very least, I could do videos to help people understand how little the average mainstream journalist, including myself, when I was there, how little we have time to know what we're talking about, how little we really know, so that, at the very least, hey, if you want to still watch your favorite mainstream news station, fine, but watch with a warning sign. You know what I mean? At least watch with that label that's like, these people may not know more than you or anywhere near what you know or other people out there know. So just, don't stop talking to your grandma. Don't give away your rights. Don't, just just handle with care, because a lot of people, I think we set ourselves up for the person who's just kind of going along to get along, which a lot of people are. I try not to say like every person is just, they just don't care, but some people are just busy. They work long hours, they come home, they're just trying to cook dinner, they're just trying to get through the day, and they turn on their mainstream news station and they think because we present it to them that we really know what we're doing here. The graphics and the lighting and the way that we dress and the way we talk and the scripts and all this stuff. It's meant to tell you we're an authority, but we're not an authority. We're really not. We don't have time. Most of us, even the most well-meaning people, like we don't have the resources to really know what we're doing. One of the last stories I did in my career, I came back extremely frustrated. It was about the Clean Water Act. And, the Clean Water Act is something where the vast majority of people in the environmental world are left-leaning and or they love the Clean Water Act. They would think any changes to the Clean Water Act would be completely devastating. But there are parts of the Clean Water Act that I learned when I had time to start reading Senate hearings and whatnot, transcripts, that did seem kind of litigious and weird, and I wasn't really quite sure what the point of them was, and I could understand what farmers were talking about or other people that were concerned. But like this particular story, I'm driving back 2 hours from where I interviewed this farmer or whatever, we're talking about it, and like, I need to read the Senate report and I don't have time. And I turned to one of my coworkers who had been in the business for decades, like 40 plus years. And her answer was just say what NBC News said, because they're typically right. And that was like the advice given, just regurgitate. And I'm thinking, how does the NBC News person in New York City know more about this issue than me? I'm a full-time environmental reporter and I barely know what I'm talking about. There's no way these people know.
And you're in the car with the farmer.
I'm actually going out and talking to them. Yeah, they're just regurgitating press conference talking points. I'm the one. Yeah, right. I've been given the most leeway to really understand how this will affect actual people, like what the real people who deal with the Clean Water Act and the pros, cons, or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm definitely in it way more than somebody in a studio in New York City. And yet I'm supposed to say what they say. That was the answer. I'm like, dude, come on. Are you serious? Like that. Don't you see what they're getting wrong every single day? And then we're just repeating it. So the more I started to see that, the more it was like, I just can't do this anymore. I feel complicit. And like I said, I don't know how much it was the industry that changed, which I do think it did, but I don't know if it was that it was that it changed that drastically, but I do think I changed drastically. And I just think more than anything, it wasn't that I started to know a lot more necessarily. It was that I finally started to realize what I didn't know. And when I was confronted with what I didn't know, then I felt very concerned about doing any story where I presented myself as an authority, knowing in the back of my mind, I really was not an authority. And so then I just started doing stupid stories that were like brain dead stories because I only felt safe doing that. You know what I mean? Like, this restaurant's not going to have plastic bottles anymore. Okay, well, I have a master's degree. I could do more than that, but I don't feel comfortable because I just don't have the resources.
Interesting. What I like about that story is it's kind of that moment where you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore because I see that, again, I'm already self-censoring here at my job. I'm doing fluff pieces. The industry's going in the wrong place. So you've been doing this, a little bit over a year now, year and a half, too?
Yeah, I started doing Airstream stuff a couple years ago, but I've only been doing media analysis for about a year. So when you first get started, what are some of the top topics that you're gravitating to? And then obviously COVID's going on through this whole thing, and now you've expanded to talking to people like Robert Malone and even dangerous thinkers like myself. So, where'd you start? Where do you think you are right now, and how'd you get there? It's like change blindness, as my husband says. You just keep doing more and more. And then if you had said, oh, you're going to talk to this guy that used to be on InfoWars last year, I would have been like, oh, really? I don't know. Am I ready for something like that? But you just talk to scarier and scarier people. And then eventually you end up on Jason Bermas' show. I don't know how that happens.
We're so like frightening over here. We're so frightening. I got to tell you, it's like a Rob Zombie flick on my channel every day.
Yeah. Well, let's just say like one of my first videos when I started doing this would have been like, cannabis, and you're definitely like up there with maybe meth or heroin or something, like where it's like she did the gateway drug, man. See, this is what happens. This is your brain on drugs, kids. You're gonna end up doing Jason Burmis. I probably shouldn't have said that. My husband probably doesn't like that I just said I'm gonna end up doing Jason Burmis, but
No one likes you said that. Trust me. My audience is like, what's going on here, Jason?
yeah, what's happening? Yeah, but no, I mean, the first time I hit the censorship wheel was like the first video I did that went real bonkers, and probably the only one that's ever hit that level of views was I just Antifa, the idea of Antifa, what was Antifa, all that stuff was trending at the time, and there are not many of us who have like actually really covered Antifa aligned groups, and so I was in Seattle and I had to cover May Day once a year, and so I just did a video talking about what it was like, covering May Day, what it's like in Seattle, and just stuff that I thought mainstream news missed about, kind of the economics of like the economic aspect of Antifa aligned groups, whereas it's often just quickly they'll say like they just mobilized to just stop fascists or racists, and I never really saw that. I didn't see Hitler aligned groups that they were like going out to stop. That was never what I saw in Seattle. It was definitely something that had more of an economic bent to it, and so I just talked about it, and that video went bonkers. It hit 1 million views in 5 days, and then YouTube basically shadow banned it. I'm not kidding you. Like, you would search the exact name of the video and it would not come up. A bunch of my other videos would come up, but you would have to go like 7 pages deep in Google, or if you did Bing or DuckDuckGo, it would come up immediately because So my takeaway there was like, okay, either Google is like the worst search engine on the face of the earth because I'm putting in my name and my video title and it's not coming up, or something's happening to me right now, and to watch my video go from, like hundreds of thousands of views per day to like 100, or 50 views a day. My subscribers were at like 12,000, 15,000 a day new, and then like 0. There's no way that happened organically. So that was my first introduction to they're like watching me. Now my that video is age restricted. You can search it and find it now months later. But yeah, they were like, okay, she's gotten enough, we're, and I don't even know why that video wasn't even that controversial. I'm not really quite sure what it was about that.
Alison,
I did go to some video of Antifa, but that,
just so you understand, right now on my channel, they've age restricted over 22 videos in the last 2 weeks. They haven't done so much this last week and a half, and some of them are direct eyewitness accounts of 9/11 from being in the building. No, I'm not in them. In fact, they age restricted the Miami raid on Epstein's house. The FBI released. I put it up because finally it was available to the public. There's nothing in there that should be age restricted.
Yeah.
So they're age restricting history, and like you said, you already got that taste of, oh my God, they're limiting my account. Demonetization probably wasn't that far behind.
Yeah, and then subsequently I had a bunch of videos demonetized. It's funny, Jason. Back then I would do videos about like I was demonetized, what is going on here? And now I'm so far into that world that getting demonetized, it's like it's not news anymore. It's kind of funny to me that I actually used to get all worked up about it, because now it's just trying to keep my channel alive at all. Not demonetization is like child's play at this point. It's just trying to not have my entire account closed down. And and it's a constant chicken and the egg or cat and mouse game with YouTube. What works, what doesn't work. For a while, I was just self-demonetizing in order to kind of fly under the radar. I thought that was going to work for me. It really didn't. They still came after me. And then it also, I think, hurt my reach because for them, it's like, oh, this isn't going to make any money, so we're not going to show it to people. So
they can run ads on your channel with you being fully demonetized. That's in the terms of service since November. And even if you're demonetized and not making it, they can still run ads on it. So don't think they won't. And the other thing is that, everybody gets a cut of premium YouTube users except for us. You know what I mean? That's another thing that they won't do either once you're fully demonetized anyway.
Right. Yeah, which I think then really it leads me to my big question is why do they choose what they choose? Because if it's not really about money, then it's got to be about control, I guess. And so because they've made so much money that I guess they just don't care about it anymore, right?
No,
So
because
it's
they're
just,
an
yeah,
arm of the military-industrial complex. Allison, listen. Did you see what Elon Musk rolled out today?
Mm-mm.
He rolled out Tesla Bot, the human-like robot that looks like something out of Super Hot, only it's like white and then like with a black face. I'll be doing
Like
a
a
story on it
stormtrooper.
later. This is it. Like, I keep trying to explain to people, Google in no way, shape, or form is a private company. It is not. It is not. It is not. Again, when you talk about them working, I mean, just again, look at the basics. You got them achieving quantum supremacy now over a year and a half ago in public with NASA. Again, NASA couldn't be a bigger front for the military-industrial complex. I mean, all right, for instance, 2 days ago, the World Economic Forum put out one of their nice little short videos that was brought to you by the people of You'll Own Nothing and Be Happy and Be Eating Synthetic Meat. You remember that one, right?
Yeah.
This new one, we should probably just bring it up. But it literally tells you that you're going to probably be wearing face masks forever. It asks you at the end what you liked about the lockdowns and what we can keep, okay? But in the midst of it, they talk about facial recognition technology and how the masks kind of get around that. Don't worry, NASA to the rescue. We have technology from them that's going to hone in on your heart because that's as unique as your fingerprint. And we're going to hone in on your heart with NASA technology on behalf of the World Economic Forum.
Wow.
This is it. Like, Google is nothing more than I'll say it again, a civilian Trojan horse system. Let's just put it on paper. The largest operating system in the world via Android. People never really discuss that, but there are more of these. As many people have devices and keep them, Android is everywhere. You could say that the Chromebooks are also an extension of that in every classroom across the country. Think about that. That's just the operating system. Then, the number one web browser in the world, Chrome, the number one video platform in the world, YouTube, the number one search engine in the world.
And by far, not even, it's not like there's even really a close second, is there?
No, and they've given backdoor access to our government from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the guy that helped bring it all to us, Eric Schmidt, not only did he write this one, Reshaping the Future of People, Nations, and Businesses, the New Digital Age, must read 2013, but he was on the National Security Council for years. You can't tell me the CEO of Alphabet, the shell company for it all, working on the National Security Council while they work on quantum mechanics and AI with the government is any more than a government front. This is techno-fascism. It's here.
Well, and I was lucky enough to get Ron Paul on my channel a few weeks ago, and I was asking him about that. And, what would he do? Section 230 and all this stuff is being debated right now. And, he didn't have, I don't think he had like a great answer, but one of the things he did talk about was, no money, like no government giving money to Google to like work with them, so like he was saying that anytime we hear about these partnerships that there's definitely money changing hands and that there's a financial incentive, not just hey, maybe the government will leave us alone if we do their bidding, but that there's far more money changing hands than we realize between these. And so then you really have to ask the question of at what point legally should they be regulated as a government entity? I think the standard is pretty high at this point, and having had constitutional attorneys on before, they're not totally sure if you could argue it in court, but somebody's going to. I mean, there already are cases.
It's all right. Listen, they work
now
with the government on every aspect. If it could be more in your face, they put a COVID-19 app on there immediately. We've already known they have backdoor access. Yes, that's the robot that you're looking at. That's Tesla
scary,
Bot.
dude.
It's awesome. No, this is the guy that says, let's put brain chips in you from DARPA, again, 50 years ago. This is it. He's telling you language is going to be eviscerated in the next 5 to 10 years because of this technology.
So what I don't understand about Elon Musk is listening to him on Rogan like a year or so ago. he maybe this is just propaganda for him, like he's greasing the wheels for it, but I remember him saying he felt like AI was not being taken seriously enough as far as dangers are concerned.
Many years ago,
And
4 years ago. That's not his last one.
What do you think? Did he just decide, I don't care now, I'm just going to jump in the game, or what? Like, why would he say it's dangerous and then he would unveil Stormtrooper? I just don't understand.
Here's how I'm looking at it. Guys like him, guys like Bezos, guys like Peter Thiel, you hear about them on varying levels. In fact, I would say right there, it probably goes Musk, Bezos, Thiel. Almost no one knows who Thiel is. He probably has the most power out of all three. And by the way, he probably has the best portfolio and has the most actual wealth.
What's his connection to PayPal nowadays?
Nothing at this point. But again, him and Musk were two of the major investors in the very, very beginning. There were others, but Musk was somehow smart enough through his connections to kind of weasel them out legally. That's what most of these guys are. They're just sociopaths for business that eventually get big enough where the government's like, you know what? Let's work with them. Let's put them as the face of this. That's how they're power hungry. So eventually, like, let me give you an example. Elon Musk, one of the videos I did this month was pre-COVID, talked about mRNA technology, reprogramming your DNA. And what he was really talking about was life extension technology and talking about, human beings living for 200, 300 years through this technology alone. He also discussed what I've been telling people for many years. There is no overpopulation. It's a myth. He says, look, in relation to the rest of the world, if you were to just go up into a random area in space and not know where you were, and you were to drop a cannonball, the chances of hitting a human being are so minute and minuscule, it's like not even thought about. And he's actually talked quite openly about the population implosion that's coming because of our policies. Now, I think, it's around that time he stops talking about AI, he stops talking about all mRNA, he stops talking about all these different things that SpaceX starts getting all the contracts with the military. He starts, bringing Neuralink into fruition, right? He's on Rogan, and AI is now this big thing. So I think that, it's kind of a you can't beat us, join us thing. And, I don't believe Elon Musk is dumb enough to think that rockets are taking us to the moon. Like the next moon mission now, for instance, they were teasing it yesterday. I believe it was either Boston Dynamics or NASA. I think it was Boston Dynamics, tweeted out the new Atlas robot video. I played it on my show. Two of them running around doing shit, crazy. And they're like,
right.
Yeah, well, they're saying, well, why? I wouldn't be surprised if these were on the new NASA mission to the moon. So I'm not kidding. And that's the next thing. That's the next thing they're going to show us for the big fucking show that NASA's taking us to space. It ain't going to be humans going. It's going to be robots going. And that's if they're going. Because guess what? Hollyweird and technology has gotten so good that now we are in that realm within real time. They could fake something that probably could never, ever be disproven, Alison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It scares me. I'm curious what you think about his satellite internet venture, because
I'm so glad you asked that, Alison.
Good, because we're trying to figure out what to do. I mean, keep in mind, one of the reasons that I was able to make the transition that I've made, and hopefully soon can maybe someday be independent totally, is that we can live in a cheap place where we can get the kind of land we want, but we can afford it. In order to do that, though, and do this job, I need connectivity, and so like rural Wi-Fi can really suck. And so we're like, well, should we do the satellite thing? But I'm kind of freaked out about it, so I don't really know what I should do.
Well, it depends on your speeds, because listen, all these things are accessible once you're on the internet. But what that really was, again, why Elon Musk is working with them, because DARPA gave him all the contracts. So at the same time SpaceX put up Starlink, they put up their blackjack network. Okay? So in conjunction with Starlink going up, this is from last year, I believe. What is this? 5/12/20. So yes, last year, they openly told you that their next network goes up with SpaceX and Starlink. That is what I'm trying to explain. This is nothing more than a front for the military-industrial complex.
Right.
Rocket
Our chief
delivery.
investigative reporter Eric Flack watched that live stream as it was unfolding. Now, we're not going to play you the entire video, but we do want to give you some extra insight into today's incident with this. And, you know, Flack, we got to point out as well, these views expressed by
I don't even know what we're playing,
have really
Allison.
been a big
I don't even know what
concern for
play
judges
is
presiding
playing
over the
here.
Capitol riot
I'm going to have to get rid of all these. I'm just going to give it
and that's
Windows.
why it's so important.
And it's
we
not
can
even
delve
there.
into some of these videos, judges presiding.
Hold
over
on,
these
guys.
cases of
Oh,
the
is it here?
500
Me.
plus
There it is.
Capitol
I
riot
think it's me.
defendants.
Bam. It was the suspect in that Capitol thing. All right. We're back, guys. I'm sorry about that ludicrous distraction that obviously doesn't put me on par with any TV news. They're much smarter than me. So, there you go.
So
I mean,
you're saying I should not get Starlink.
I'm not saying that. Listen, here's the thing. Technology is a double-edged sword, right? It can empower or enslave. If you're empowering yourself by being out in the woods, there are other options. Maybe you can get lucky enough to find yourself into a 5G tower, and then you get these little rigs that trick certain SIM cards into thinking they're phones, and with unlimited data. I've seen those. You can also set up repeaters with old dishes, but I think that it is a viable option. The problem is that while that viable option goes commercial, he's making much more money, not on commercial Starlink that can be a failure just like Tesla for so many years, but on blackjack and the U.S. military and the Air Force and all those other things. So, you know, to me, it's just, listen, I think he's a smart guy, but I don't think he's as smart as they make him out to. There's a lot of smart guys out there, and they're behind the scenes. That's my feeling on this. I think that we're in a rapid pace into the fourth industrial revolution, and people don't even realize it yet. And I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, I'm concerned about our daughter. We just hope that we're setting her up for some semblance of success by giving her a childhood that is not hyper connected in these different ways, so she can see that there is a viable, valuable life in a quiet place where you buy your meat from your neighbor's cattle ranch, and you know, that's fun, that the relationships you can build that you don't necessarily just have on a phone or on a social media platform or whatever else, that you can have a fun, enjoyable, valuable life in a place that I think younger people think would be boring. You know, we're hoping that she enjoys it, and that maybe she, you know, she'll never be like void of this stuff we're talking about.
Come to Iowa. You can have the best of both worlds. Like I'll tell you what, I had my buddy come up from New York, and from, like, I'm in the Quad Cities, but you're 15 minutes out. There's dirt roads. It's cow country. You can get a plot of land, all those different things, and then you have both. I know we're riding on time at the end of the hour, but you brought up climate change, and you know, one of the big things that I've been focusing on is kind of the predictive programming and how climate change. I wish I hadn't X'd all those things out now. Let me see if I can bring them back up. But climate change is going to be the next move for these lockdowns. In fact, NASA's a part of that, believe it or not. So let me see if I can bring my history back up. Recently closed. Man, I closed them all. But they were basically encouraging the lockdowns and saying NASA data says we should be doing this more and more often because it's saving the Earth. I recently did a watch along for a thing called Earth 2100, and it was a 2009 piece by ABC News. It had John Podesta in it, Van Jones, who just got $100 million from Bezos, Eric Schmidt, the guy we were just talking about, he makes an appearance, Anthony Fauci, and James Woolsey of the CIA. And in the first 30 seconds, they're taking you on a woman's journey. They're giving you a like cartoon-like journey of a woman who lives from 2009 to 2100, but meanwhile they're cutting in all these talking heads and telling you why this might happen, right, and how these are going to unfold. Within the first 30 seconds, they talk about New York City under quarantine. She's living through all these things. They talk about the new normal, in quotations. They have people in masks. They talk about refugee camps. They talk about the evisceration of the suburbs. Ultimately, they talk about viruses as well. That's Fauci's part. And then geoengineering, which we had a long discussion on, where, yes, they block out the clouds with planes.
Right.
Now,
yeah, we did talk about that.
We did have a conversation about that. Now, all of these things have already really occurred now in the span of not 100 years, but 11 years. Okay, but the running theme throughout this is you're bad, and she continually moves into smaller spaces. There are less resources for everybody, but then they ignore things like automation or vaccine passports or the things that we're seeing into coming to fruition now with Tesla Bot. And I've just seen this pattern of pre-programming. And I believe once the virus thing is gone, maybe in 2, 3, 4 years, depending on how long this hysteria is stretched out and how much of a clamp they have, they will then move it into climate change. Being somebody that worked in the environment, I'm sure that's not what you want to hear. Or, I'm sure it's not what you want to hear. But I would like to get your perspective on all this work and obviously caring about the environment, talking about becoming a little bit more with nature, with your family, all these things. How do you feel about it when a guy like me says something like that?
I don't really have any feelings. I've said before that if I ever get the chance to teach journalism school, a class at J school, that I want to call my class Stop It. I don't know if you've seen that Bob Newhart skit where he's like a therapist and some lady comes in and says, I'm just afraid of driving because I think I'm going to, and his answer, like as a therapist, is just stop it. Just stop, doing that. And I want to sit my students down and have them read headlines and then analyze their emotional attachment to stories. That would be my whole class, would be like, what was your emotional reaction to what you just read there and why? And make them just become hyper self-aware of their own tribalism. Like why did you get upset when this person said that? And I would just make them watch your videos all day long and be like, what pissed you off about what Jason said? Let's talk about it. So anyway, just to your point there, I don't really have a reaction, like an emotional reaction or anything. I think, I'm still at that stage where when it comes to climate change specifically, it's an extremely complex, even among the scientists that I spoke with, which I'm sure were a small microcosm, right, of what's out there of opinion. There was a lot of variety. And so, often it's pitched to people like science just believes this one thing, but there was a lot of unknowns, even the scientists who were like true believers about, we need to do something now, whatever, even they would tell you like, we weren't really studying this a long time ago. So to say that we know change over time, we barely know, like when it comes to sort of the base level of ocean acidification, how acidic, what was the pH level of the ocean 5-10 years ago? We really weren't monitoring that kind of thing. So we don't know what it was like 100 years ago. Was it like this 100 years ago? Could it go back to that? What's the human cause of it? Like, there's just so many unknowns. And I think the problem with the way that climate change is discussed in mainstream news is that it's presented in a very oversimplified fashion, with a certain level of hysteria, I guess, that not all scientists share, or even the ones who do share it are still, they would question the solutions proposed. They would also question, whether we really know, like, how we got here or what the effects are, because the honest ones anyway will tell you that there still are just a lot of unknown variables in it. And so I think where I stand on it now is that I'm trying to, again, same reason I listen to people like you. I'm like, I want to know what the people who are the outcasts, the people that would have been looked at as sort of the anti-science people. I want to know what the guy who works at MIT, who's clearly not anti-science, but has a different opinion on this stuff. I want to know what that person, so kind of relearning it all. I mean, anecdotally speaking, I do get concerned whenever I hear the government nowadays set up a problem where they're the ones then have to go and make the solution, right? And the solution is control of some kind. That nowadays versus 5 years ago, my ears didn't perk up. Now they do. And so climate change is definitely an area that I get concerned about when I hear, same with COVID, right? Hysteria, solution, control. It's kind of the same, even for somebody who's a dummy, who's just getting into this world, I see the pattern. Then again, I live in an area where I will say, like, granted, forest health is a real problem. We've been mismanaging forests for a century. We've been putting out fires. We've left a lot of fuel out there, and that needs to be dealt with. On the other hand, we haven't gotten rain in a long, long time. And we have barely by the skin of our teeth escaped 4 wildfires near our own house. So, I know I don't like when people just use anecdotes for science. So I'm not saying that's science. I'm just saying, I know I live in an area where wildfire is a real issue. I don't think it's a climate change phenomenon. Like it's just climate change caused this. I know that the forest issue is a real problem and we got to deal with that. That said, if you had, and 90% of fires, I should say almost 90% of fires, I believe, are started by humans in some way. Power poles or your spark on the side of the road by your car, that kind of thing. But if you had 100 gazillion sparks and you had wetter ground, you wouldn't have as much of a problem. So do I think that, do I know that we're dealing with drought out here? Do I know farmers who are having water is becoming a real, that will be something I believe people are going to be fighting over. Maybe, not in the too distant future. And not just because of the water issue itself, but now, just to bring up another environmental issue that people don't hear much about, like we start listing wildlife as an endangered species. Salmon now in the Pacific Northwest is one of those. They're I think listed as threatened now, certain species of salmon. And so now they're protected over water rights for certain agricultural operations. So now there's they talk about it now like the fish. They're the fish people and the farm people. And that, so you can see how then that the division starts to sow, right? And it's fascinating to watch how, again, you're trying to sift through, okay, there may be a real problem here. Let's figure out what is the real problem with water levels? What's the problem with irrigating land? But try to differentiate that from how the problem is posed in a way that, once again, you see it like these people versus that people, these people versus that people. And then the solution, a real viable solution to figure out people's problems, is silenced just by politics, and then just keeps people at the very lower level fighting each other. And then, the people above them are totally fine. But so I've seen that play out. So, and it's kind of a long-winded way to answer your question. I guess I don't have an emotional reaction. I'm trying to learn more about it, and I'm not totally sure where I fall on it anymore. I have personal experience with what I think is a real problem. On the other hand, I don't think that the government coming in and locking people down is what I want to do as a solution for really any problem, unless, I'm trying to think of one thing where I would be like, yes, I would like the government to lock down my behavior and take away personal liberty to solve it. I just can't think of what that issue would be. So does that help at all?
It's a very honest answer, and I think it's a good way to kind of roll out and show that you are you're a person, right? And just like me, I think that in order to grow, you've got to recognize some of your past mistakes and be willing to listen to those differing opinions. I love that about you. I love the fact that you're talking about, let's go to the most contrarian person. Let's see why this person believes it. I'm not worried about Elon Musk because I don't like his haircut, right? I'm worried about Elon Musk because of all these contracts and where he's gone and how he's become this cult-like figure, and he's like the anti-Bezos. I mean, Bezos looks like Lex Luthor, but at the same time, that ball's rolling forward. So I love what you're doing. I think your presentation is awesome. I think that it's necessary. I think that it brings in so many people that obviously a guy like me isn't going to bring in on the first time. So tell people how they can support you, where they can check you out, what you got coming this week, and what they should check out in the past if they want to get a good taste of what Alison Morrow TV is all about.
Well, I mean, I'm on YouTube, Rockfin like you too, Jason, Locals, Odyssey. So depending on what platform you like, I'm on those. But YouTube, as we discussed earlier, is not really the best place to follow because you won't know when I get suspended next because they're not going to let me tell you. So, I would say if you like the videos, I usually nuke my live streams on YouTube and finish them up on Rockfin. So check me out on Rockfin. And mostly right now, I just have been focusing on, I would just say it's free speech and media analysis, but that has taken me into the COVID world a lot because a lot of the people who are being silenced right now are talking about COVID. I'd like to talk to people who are, again, the dangerous people, the ones that mainstream, whether it's corporate news or the government, is telling people you really should not listen to. I want to hear what they have to say for myself. And I think a lot of people, when they go into independent media as an audience member, okay, I've noticed that a lot of people, I think, want you to already have like your act together, as far as like you, right? Like you're way ahead on the stuff that you've read, the stuff that you've learned, you've studied. The stuff you're talking about is light years ahead of where I am. And so, I think sometimes people get mad, like, Alison doesn't even know about this thing, and you're like, okay, well, I'm learning. So if you're interested in seeing a dummy from mainstream news learning the stuff that I'd never heard of while I was telling you what was going on while I was a corporate journalist, right? I had no clue about this stuff. You want to see somebody who's in the process of trying to unravel, years of not just being shaped by propaganda and narratives, and trying to now get out of that and start seeing what's really going on, and then take people along for the journey. I think that's what you'll probably get out of my channel. You're not going to get somebody like, I'm not you, right? So don't come to me if you think I'm going to be like Jason. You're going to be like,
listen, you do good interviews. Listen, you make good conversations. You ask the right questions, and you're honest, right? And the honest pursuit of the truth is what more of us have to be involved in. And I think a lot of your stuff is not only well produced, but very palatable for people to come in and start asking bigger questions. So, Alison, this rocked. We got to do it more often. I'm glad you were able to make time. One more time where they can financially support you, because let's get some cheese Alison Morrow's way.
Oh, financially. Well, I mean, you can always, I guess you can tip me on Rockfin, right? I'm on Patreon, but they censor too. I have PayPal, but they censor too. So you can become part of my locals community, and support me there. But I think just watching on Rockfin, like if you're on Rockfin and you want to go over there, right, Jason? I mean, Rockfin's pretty good about looking at who people are watching and stuff.
Well, if you're premium, so if with my paying subscribers, guys, if you're endorsing me, you get all of her content. If you endorse her, you get all of mine. And then anything with a premium that you watch does contribute to the amount of Ray you get. But you can always tip on any video. So you see something you like, please tip her. Encourage her to put more stuff on Rockfin. We're trying to bring more creators in there. And once again, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add back to the last point too. Yeah. I think I'm somebody who you could send your sister or like cousin who's kind of on the fence. You can send them to my channel, because I think what I try to do is bridge the world of the mainstream and the conspiracy, and just to show that people with my background are talking to folks like Jason, and that if you're hearing that these people are dangerous, mainstream reporters don't talk to those people, corporate technology companies say that they're disinformation agents or whatever, I guess what I've tried to do is to like reclaim that it's okay to talk to weirdos. You know what I mean? Not that you're a weirdo, but it's okay to talk to the people that the power elite want you never to hear. It's okay. Like, you are not going to self-destruct. You are not going to combust. Like, I'm a totally normal, person who worked in corporate news, and I'm here talking to Jason Burmis. It's okay. You're not going to, it's like, I feel like it's like the way they told you were going to get AIDS or something by hugging someone back in the 80s, So, and like, what I'm doing is giving you a hug. And I'm like, you know what I mean? This is ridiculous that we're at this era where people are telling you that ideas are dangerous. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And like I said, that emotional trigger we were talking about earlier, that's what I just want people to start being aware that you're being brainwashed to keep you away from information that it's just information. You know what I mean? Do with it what you will. It's not going to come in and invade your house. The idea, when you listen to Jason's show, it's like, okay, you don't agree with him? Walk away. You do agree with him? Great. Do whatever you want based on it's just information, And so I'm just trying to remove that layer of I don't even know what you would call it, but just outcasting people, scapegoating, just, that moral dissociation we were talking about. So send people my way that you think would benefit from, like, they're not ready to go full stupid. You know what I mean? Like, cause I should say it's really full smart, but they're not ready to go all the way yet, but they want to dabble their toes a little bit and like going from that mainstream world and trying to understand something ain't right here. I think my channel is good for that.
Excellent, Allison. Awesome. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. We are on Friday, right? It is Friday?
Yes.
Yes, Friday.
It is Friday,
So
yep.
You have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll do it again soon, okay?
Thanks, Jason.
All right, thank you. Alison Morrow TV, that's where you can follow her. Over on Twitter, thumbs the video up, subscribe, share. If you want to financially support the show, you can do so over at Rockvin, or we have the GoFundMe links down below. If you make a year-long subscription, it's $99.99. You save yourself 2 months, and it helps support the program. In fact, I think that we have, what do we got? Some tips I do want to talk about really quick. Thank you so much. Chassis Cakes. See the news that it looks like Trudeau has a substantial stake in both Moderna and Pfizer. Thought a patent at the university, through a patent at the University of British Columbia. He is looking scared today. Well, if that is actual information, we'll look into it. And let's see, Dallas of Odds says, have a great weekend, beautiful people. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Guys, I love you. I'll see you on the flip.